Hey, Econ 365, we're back in business, rewinding back to chapter 6, and we're going to start talking about torts. You may recall we went out of order because I wanted to cover contracts right after property law because both of them involve voluntary arrangements. The contracts having the time element that made them more complicated than the property law material that we covered earlier. So now we're back to talking chapter 6 and chapter 7 about torts. Torts are wrongs, T-O-R-T. Don't add the E, that would be a dessert. Okay, we're not talking about that. So it's a wrong. It's a situation, a private or civil wrong, an injury, independent of any sort of contractual relationship, resulting from the breach of a legal duty. So you have harm, someone caused the harm, and there was a breach. And those are the three elements of a tort that we're going to get to more formally in a little bit. In law school, the focus was on torts has been who should pay for an injury, more corrective justice, and deciding who, if anyone, is responsible. And if you go back to chapter 3, when we dealt with Butterfield, and we dealt with Davies, you may recall, and then we dealt with the British Columbia Electric Railway case, and when we dealt with Sturgis v. Bridgman earlier than that, a lot of it, the focus there was really who's going to be held responsible, and it depended upon the actions of the defendant, but it also depended on the actions of the plaintiff. Some extreme views to begin with kind of got modified with the last clear chance rule, and that got modified even further, of course, in the British Columbia case. So that's kind of the focus on where lawyers have generally treated torts before the economists got involved. The economic focus is not simply what to do after an accident occurs, but look at the rules that apportion liability. Some of the things like last clear chance would be a good start along those lines, but also talk about how the law should be designed to induce pre-accident precaution that will minimize the likelihood and severity of accidents. So we're looking not only what do you do after an accident occurs, but how do you legislate behavior to avoid accidents occurring. There's a clear trade-off here. The trade-off is the more care you take, the less likely there's going to be harm. Fewer accidents, and maybe the severity of accidents will go down. Look what's going on right now. People are not driving, and the number of accidents occurring has dropped dramatically. I mean, like unheard of decreases in auto accidents. But on the other hand, if you take precaution, it is costly. For example, precaution might be a decrease in the speed limit. Well, if you decrease the speed limit low enough, you'll reduce an awful lot of accidents, but it will take people an awful long time to get from one point to another. Now, what if, for example, on the 101 freeway between here and San Francisco, we lower the speed limit, which is generally 65, to 25 miles an hour? There'll be fewer fatalities on that road, but you can understand very easily people don't want to have to take 16 hours to get up to San Francisco from here. So we have a clear trade-off here, and economics helps us to identify that. An interesting question arises in the analysis of torts, and that is, should the wrongdoer always be held liable for the harm that they cause? Now, the wrongdoer is going to be the person who causes the accident. So if you get hit by a car, the accident's caused by the car, but is the driver always to be held responsible? And the answer clearly is not. So, for example, if somebody simply jumps out between two vehicles and they get hit by a car, the driver's not likely to be held responsible. Okay? So it's not as simple as that, because if it was as simple as that, anytime there's an accident, we would look at strict liability, and all we would have to establish is that, yes, this is the person that caused the harm, and therefore they're guilty. But strict liability is only one of a number of different analyses that we take place with regards to evaluating who might be responsible or not responsible in the context of a tort. Okay. Sometimes exonerating a wrongdoer is the only conceivable way to induce the potential victim to take precaution as well. So there are clearly situations where there might be no liability and it's clearly in the hands of the individual. For example, a lot of times in sporting events, your ticket will say the sports team, the owner of the stadium, the proprietor has no responsibility. It is only within your hands to be careful to avoid getting hit by a ball and all that. That's kind of come down the wayside because you know that major league teams have put screens not only behind home plate, but also down the foul lines to further shield participants, spectators, from being harmed. And it wasn't always that way. That's a pretty recent phenomenon. Actually, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I had some students who wrote about that because there were lawsuits, particularly involving the minor leagues, that dealt with that very issue. Okay, so we don't know if we're going to be the one who is harmed or the one who causes the harm. So in designing a system that is most efficient, we want one that will sort of lower the costs when all the costs are taken into account, and lower it for the combination of the two parties. Okay. One clash that